through the wall. The manager looked warily at Denise. "So you say that someone pushed you?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Denise said. "But do you have any idea who?" Denise looked nervously around. She could see 7102 standing on shed outside the museum, being prepared for her day's work. 7102 glared at her. She gulped. "No, sir," she said. Edward looked puzzled at this. "I see," said the manager thoughtfully. He turned to the Fat Controller. "What are your thoughts, Sir Stephen?" The Fat Controller sighed thoughtfully. "I understand you have a name. Denise, is it?" he asked. "Yes, sir," replied Denise. "Well, Denise, I have to admit this has put me in a rather difficult situation. You're a good engine, and it would be a shame to send you away. But these two incidents leave me wondering if I should keep you on. I can't have engines who go where they're not supposed to, or end up nearly running into the back of trains." A sympathetic smile crossed his face. "I've seen a lot of diesels in my time. You don't strike me as the troublemaking sort. I shall look into this matter. Meanwhile, I need you to take a fuel train to Crovens Gate." The two men turned and walked away, pausing only to praise Henry for his rescue last night before he left for the sheds. Edward looked at Denise. "Why didn't you tell the truth?" he asked. I can't," Denise stammered. Edward looked around. The only other engine in the yard was 7102, who already had her attention on the increasing number of passengers at the station. Edward looked at Denise. A glimmer of realization shone in the old engine's eyes. "Don't be afraid of her," he said. "In a situation like this, it is easy to tell a white lie, but it is a far braver thing to tell the truth." Denise simply sighed and rumbled away to arrange her train. Unbeknownst to everyone, Diesel had heard everything. The Fat Controller and the manager gathered everyone together in the museum. Eagle's overhaul and Neil's restoration were now complete, so Eagle had moved him and Edward into the museum under his own steam. "As you know," announced the Fat Controller, "Denise almost ran into the back of the Flying Kipper last night." Everyone gasped, except for 7102, who looked strangely calm. The Fat Controller noticed this. "Were it not for Henry's quick thinking," he continued, "the incident could have been far more serious. We have gained access to the CCTV footage, and I'll be reviewing it with your manager here when we both have the opportunity. I cannot have incidents like this happen on my railway." "Meanwhile, Eagle, I'm putting you on passenger runs on the exhibition line. This'll make sure you're ready in time for the rail tour," said the manager. "Yes, sir, thank you, sir," Eagle said excitedly. "It will be nice to exercise my wheels again." "That's a good engine, but take it easy. The last thing we want is for you to break down," the manager grinned. 7102, you're needed to take some empty coaching stock from Wellsworth to Crovens Gate Works. Diesel, he continued, I want you to fetch some more spare parts from the works, please. They've been delivered more than they need and have donated them to us with the manufacturer's permission. "Yes, sir," Diesel said, but then a thought struck him. He waited until Eagle and 7102 had left before he spoke up. "Please, sir," he said, "can I stay at the works for another hour?" The manager looked at him, puzzled. "Well, I don't need you for the rest of the day anyway," he replied, confused. "But why do you want to do that?" "Because it's about 7102 and 199. I saw the way he and 7102 treated Denise. I think he knows something we don't. Meanwhile, Denise was sadly arranging the trucks in the yard. She did not want to be sent back to the mainland. Until her arrival on Sodor, the only place she had called home was her heritage railway. The volunteers and some of the visitors had been kind to her, but the other engines were enough to make her put as much distance between herself and that line as possible. She knew why they had treated her like this. Engines like her had replaced them, when they themselves had been proud of the fact that they had virtually destroyed most of the steam engines on the mainland. They were convinced that only they were proper diesel engines. They had watched the increasing modernization of both diesels and the main network with disgust. She couldn't help it if she was a newly built engine. A parent doesn't usually mistreat a child just because they are smaller or different to them, she thought. So why should they mistreat her? She had almost finished and was about to fetch a brake van when the tankers suddenly rammed into her. "Ooh!" she cried. Then she heard an all too familiar voice. "Grass up about your little adventure last night, did you?" The tankers pushed against Denise harder and harder. "You really think you'd be allowed to work on this island?" snarled 7102. "If I had to put up with those damn steamers who seem to think you should be allowed anywhere just to pull some decent trains again, then so be it. But I'll be scrapped before you come out of this alive." This was all too much for Denise. Something snapped inside of her. Where there was originally sadness, there was now fury. "No you don't, I've had enough of you!" Denise snapped back. She applied her brakes sharply, bumping the tankers back into 7102. "Pushing back, eh?" sneered 7102. "Well, I don't know if you've noticed, little mate, but I can push harder!" And she did. The train moved towards the goods shed, gradually picking up speed. Denise gasped. The tankers were loaded with petrol. If they crashed into a building behind the wall, Denise didn't think about it. Instantly, she pushed against the train, her wheels now spinning. She knew she could never stop in time, but if she slowed it down just enough. Her driver jumped clear and ran for cover. The buffers crumpled like playing cards underneath her. She burst through the shed wall and came to a rest on the main road, striking a car in the process. Her rear end was dented all over, and her cab windows smashed. Her eyes shut tight. But there was no explosion. No fire. She slowly opened them. There stood the tankers before her, their wheels derailed, but their hulls untouched. The wall now had a gaping hole right through it, but the sheds had been built to withstand derailments like this, so there was little risk of it collapsing on top of them. She heaved a heavy sigh of relief. Workmen came running towards her, sirens could be heard in the distance, and Bear fetched the breakdown train just as 7102 departed. Bear noticed this and looked on at her in deep suspicion as she rounded the bend and disappeared. He had seen her before, and had seen what had happened while he was being cleaned. He was only unable to take action because the train had blocked his line. He then looked towards Denise. "What a mess," he cried. "To think my sister..." "Don't worry, Denise, we'll have you out of there as soon as we can." Soon, Denise was placed on a flatbed. The firefighters and workmen had surveyed the derailed tankers and deemed them safe to be transported as scheduled, provided that they were taken to the works to be inspected for repairs later. James arrived to pick them up. He grumbled at having to do so, but one look at the scene told him it was best to accept his task. Grudgingly, he coupled up to the tankers and hauled them away. I see my sister's been up to no good, Bear remarked to Denise. She said nothing. Some things never change. She was exactly the same to all newer engines back in the day. Calling them names, bringing them down, even crashing them. Engines like her should never have been preserved. Don't worry, Denise. I'll make sure the Fat Controller hears everything. Denise just looked at her buffers sadly. No matter how many lives she had saved, she felt certain that the Fat Controller would never purchase her now. The Fat Controller was having thoughts of his own as he walked towards the car. He felt wholly sympathetic towards Denise and her plight, but he could not afford to run the risk of losing another engine just yet, no matter how temporary it was. Edward's overhaul was still not yet complete, and the loads were too many for his railway to manage without help. He was indeed considering 7102 to take the rail tour for the Diamond Jubilee alongside Eagle, but this was only because none of his steam engines could be spared just then. After all, despite the celebrations and the thin clergyman's books, he still had a railway to run. At that moment, the manager was reviewing the CCTV footage. It was a long and arduous task, and the manager was keen to leave for home. Suddenly, he saw a large shape hauling Denise out into the yard. It then reversed and crossed the points behind her before charging forwards at her, just after a figure climbed into and then out of her cab. The manager zoomed in on the footage. He recognized both the man's face and the number on the large shape. He picked up his phone and dialed the Fat Controller's number. "Sir Stephen," he said, "I think you might want to see this."